Hi, everyone. This is Terry from the Tag Collab. So, this week I was traveling to Austin and I was waiting for an elevator um, when was reminded of one of my favorite case studies of all time. And it's the one about the slow elevators and how a hotel solved its frustration problems not by speeding anything up, but by adding something like totally unrelated mirrors. You know how there's in all of the waiting areas for elevators, there's always a mirror, and there's a reason for that. And so, what this story is one of those stories that feels almost like a little bit too simple, and yet it reveals something really profound about human behavior, perception, and leadership. It has everything to do with how we approach complex problems in business and in systems and in our own lives. And so, the case study goes something like this. A hotel was drowning in complaints about these slow elevators. Customers were super annoyed. The staff was overwhelmed and stressed out because they kept getting these complaints about elevators just being too slow and people having to wait too long. The leadership of the hotel was ready to pour a massive amount of money into, doing a machine upgrade until someone stepped in and said, you don't have a speed problem. What you have is a waiting problem. So instead of rebuilding the elevators, they installed mirrors around the elevator banks. And so all of a sudden, complaints, they stopped. And it's not because the elevator got faster, but because time felt different. Um, what most people would have approached the solution with just saying, make the elevators, I think it feels intuitive. It was a counterintuitive solution that actually solved the problem, which was, and also how the question was framed. Um, so, why does this matter? When we spend so much of our lives treating symptoms instead of identifying the root cause of a problem, like we speed up the elevator without ever really asking, is this the right problem to solve? The elevator story is famous because it exposes one of the biggest blind spots in leadership. We often jump to solutions without properly framing the problem. There's even a name for that in psychology and in design thinking, and that's called problem reframing, right? Was to think about the problem in a different way. And the science behind that is reframing is a practice of redefining a problem so you can generate solutions that seemed invisible before. In cognitive psychology, it's connected to functional fixedness. You hear about fixedness a lot in design thinking, which is sort of those uh, barriers or boundaries or limitations that we put because we assume that something has to be a certain way. Um, there's like a fixedness to it. In other areas of study, it's called it's bias. So you can have cognitive fixedness, you can have structural fixedness. In other words, that a phone, thing example, could be, that something can only be used for one reason or something needs to only look this way. A blow dryer, for example, I love to use this example. Blow dryers often before, people used to always use a brush and the blow dryer. It felt like two different things. Now my favorite blow dryer is the one that has the brush on it because it frees up one of my hands and I can do other things and it sort of speeds up the process for me. Well, somebody challenged that structural fixedness and said, why do the brush and um the blow dryer have to be two separate things, right? And so that's a way of reframing which unlocks creativity. So by analyzing that the elevator was too slow was really more about people hate waiting and waiting feels longer when you're bored. And if we remove the boredom, then we fix the problem, right? In a much more efficient and cost effective way, is an example of what this case study shows. In neuroscience terms, reframing forces your brain to bypass our amygdala's quick habitual interpretations and engage what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is really more like your boss brain, your coach brain, the part responsible for perspective taking, higher order reasoning. This is where your executive functioning lives. Leaders who reframe see solutions others might miss. Why this case is so important today is because, look, we're living in a time where people want the world to speed up. Faster systems, quicker answers, more efficient institutions, immediate results. But what if the macro level solutions we chase, like technological fixes, reorganization, total overhauls, aren't always the answer? The elevator case reminds us that the most elegant solutions are sometimes sideways or ancillary, as I call them. They're unexpected, they're non-linear, and they can also be just perception based instead of having to fix the mechanical problem. Systems change doesn't always require you to have to bring in a bulldozer. Sometimes it requires, well, a mirror, right? And for those of us building and leading and reinventing anything, platforms, organizations, brands, communities, even our democracy, this matters because reframing may reveal that the obstacle isn't actually the obstacle. The experience of the obstacle is. So, what does this mean for you? Well, let this be your permission slip today that you don't always have to fix the machine. Sometimes you have to redesign the experience. Before you invest energy, money, emotions, or manpower into solving something, pause and ask, what is the actual problem here? Is there something underneath that's causing underneath the frustration? That's a way to uncover the root cause of a problem. What is what if the obvious solution isn't the wrong one? Is another question you can ask yourself. And what is the mirror in this situation? This is where clarity lives. This is where innovation begins. And so the takeaway of all of this is that the hotel didn't speed up the elevators. They changed the way people felt while waiting. That's not a small insight. It is a masterclass because the solutions that change our world rarely come from pushing harder in the same direction. I mean, the road to insanity, they say, is trying the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. They come from widening the frame, breaking the pattern, and allowing the brain to see what it couldn't see before. So, a slow elevator with a mirror means peace and tranquility, less annoyed people. What might this unlock for you, your work, your organization, or your next big idea? Think about that. Till next time.